So everybody, it's time for something that's arguably even more so close to my heart than what, granted, very little I've talked about thus far. Today I'm going to be talking just a little bit about some of my opinions, very personal opinions, about scientific education in the U.S. And unfortunately, it's not a very happy story. Let's go with one of the biggest things. Colleges and universities. You have to take the SAT or the ACT. The SAT does not have a science section, as I'm sure you all know. The ACT does, which is very nice. The GRE, which is required to get into graduate school, also does not have a science requirement, although they do have section-specific or field-specific tests that can be taken. The vast majority of students only take the general test, which has nothing to do with science. It's only mathematics and reading. The problem here is that schools are teaching to standardized tests, and the problem with standardized tests is they don't have science. Since the standardized tests don't have science, the schools are not teaching nearly as much science as I personally feel that they should. It is very, very unfortunate. Now, you can rest assured that I will be making another video about this next little portion in, I don't know, at some point. But just to give a very brief overview, just a little bit under a year ago, in February of 2002, there was a study by the Thomas Fordham Foundation. Okay? It actually came out in very early February of 2012. And what they did is they literally went to all the school districts in all the country and they rated the states based on their science curricula. Okay? Easy enough, right? Here's the problem. They went on just a regular grading scale, A to F. The problem is it's a really gray looking US, and gray means F. And the other color that's bad is green, because green is D. There were a lot of D's and F's. That means that most of the country is failing our students out of science. Not failing them as in they're not passing classes, but failing as in they're not teaching science. What is wrong here? The study pointed out 4 major issues in many, many different schools. The first, and in my personal opinion, the biggest one, is the undermining of evolution. That's the thing that I'm going to make a video on later, okay? Because evolution versus creationism creates a whole thing in me that nobody really appreciates. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's my vlog. So, undermining of evolution, that's one of the biggest ones, okay? After that, you've got really, really vague curricula that don't say much of anything about what the kids are actually supposed to do. It's just sort of random things, but I'm going to go over this a little bit more later. Next, the history of science. What happened, who did it, all that kind of stuff. And also scientific inquiry, the scientific method. You know, the basis for all things that science discovers. Kids don't know what it is. That's not good. Okay? The other thing is, ironically enough, believe it or not, math. One of the biggest and things that kids have the most difficulty with on any standardized test that every single school is prepping them for every day that the kids go in there is not being taught as part of science. How are you going to learn physics if you don't know algebra? Calculus is even better for physics, but you can get away with algebra. You can get away with trigonometry, and you'll be able to do physics. But kids are not being taught that. Some schools, according to the survey, do as much as humanly possible to stay away from math within science curricula. How can you possibly do that? But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We're going to go back to the beginning first, back to evolution. Like I said, I'm going to make a whole other video all about that. But just very briefly, just in 2011 and early 2012, there were more than 10 bills in, I believe it was 8 state legislatures, that were going to ban the study of evolution, or in some way allow creationism to be taught alongside it. Now, there's a lot of problems with this, and like I said, I'm going to get to it. Okay? But most recently, in the state where I live, which is Texas, there was a bill that was only just recently put into the House back in December. I believe it was December 12th or 19th, something around there. It doesn't really matter. It won't even be looked at until later this year. It was the earliest it could have been was the 8th of this month, but it didn't happen. Okay? The House bill is HB 285, House Bill 285. And essentially what it's saying is that high-level academia, that is colleges, universities, that kind of stuff, they can't in any way interfere with somebody who wants to do creationist research. Let me say that again. You can't prevent somebody from being funded or having a job at a university or researching creationism if they're researching creationism. Now, there's a really big problem with that, at least a big problem that I have, which is the inherent contradiction between research and creationism. You cannot research creationism. It doesn't work. And the reason is because of reason number 3 why a lot of schools failed. But I'll get to that in just a second. We're going to go to the second reason that the study pointed out that schools were failing, which was vague curricula. In other words, they suck. For example, California got an A, which is, yay, go California. You guys are awesome. I wish I lived there. Fortunately, I don't. They said something essentially along the lines of electricity and magnetism are very integral to one another in all sorts of natural forces. And then the curricula moves on to say about half a dozen or so specific skills that students need to learn about the relationship between electricity and magnetism. Obviously, 2 very, very integrated subjects. Makes sense. In New Jersey, 4th graders are asked to, quote, demonstrate an understanding of the interrelationships among fundamental concepts in the physical, life, and earth systems sciences. Does anyone else not know what that means? Because I have no idea. Basically, it's saying that a plant is connected to a person and the atmosphere. Somehow, maybe-ish. That doesn't mean anything to anybody except apparently New Jersey. But I'm not going to make fun of New Jersey because my fiance is from New Jersey. So that would be mean. Next, the third reason that was cited by the study as an issue was the lack of history and scientific inquiry. As I'm sure many of you know, there is a scientific method, and it is made up of steps. Okay? Tragically, these steps are not being taught. Instead, students are being asked simply to make observations, and that's science. Yay. No, it's not. It is not science. And if you recall, I mentioned that the whole creationist problem is in a big way a problem with the scientific method, because I'll get into more of this later. But briefly, science cannot prove God exists nor does not exist. It's just not possible. Science is incapable of doing that. Therefore, creationist research does not make any scientific, logical sense. Moving on. Math. Math. Which is very unfortunate because math is on all the standardized tests. But what teachers are not doing is telling students that in order to do science, you also need to know math. Why not? They are completely and utterly integrated to one another. You can't have math without science, just like you can't have science without math. One of them ends up explaining the other in many, many, many cases. In biology, we use all sorts of mathematical equations. Not to mention, physics uses a ridiculous number of equations. It just doesn't make sense. The only thing I can think of here is that schools are maybe not entirely deliberately lowering the curriculum standards, but lowering them maybe slightly so that they can get more federal money by having more students pass tests. Because if they focus on math and reading and literature and writing and all that stuff, instead of science, kids do better on the tests. And that's what it's all about. What we need to do is stop making it about the tests. If it's not about the testing, then we can make it about what matters, which is everything. It's math, it's science, it's reading, it's writing, it's social studies, it's history, it's everything. But if you can't tell, science is kind of a big deal for me, personally. So that's why I prefer to focus on it. Like I said, this is just my brief little summary of a study that was a good while ago, but I believe is still very relevant to us. And I hope that for some of you it may have opened your eyes, or at least gave you some new information about a small portion of the state of our country. And do note that Obama is indeed doing a great deal to try to increase education and awareness for science, research and study in all these schools. So that's at least a plus. And with that, I will see you next time.